I love a good value, and I love even more getting the most out of the equipment that is already in my bag. Of course, I still love buying new equipment, but I do get a special sort of satisfaction out of figuring out how to use the stuff that I already have in a new way. Now, there's been a lot of talk about macro photography on my Facebook page and in YouTube and comments and on Twitter, but I haven't done a ton of macro photography. So I decided that I wanted to try it out, but I didn't want to purchase any of the proper equipment to do it. So I set out to see what I already have that I can use for macro purposes. Wait a minute, let's back up a second and talk about what macro photography is. Technically, it means that you are getting, I guess, closer than a 1-to-1 magnification. But what it means to me, and probably to a lot of you out there, is just getting very close to what you're shooting at and getting a crisp, in-focus shot. And this is difficult or even impossible to do with many lenses. Now, there are a lot of ways to do macro, or as Nikon calls it, micro. So in this video, I'll demonstrate 2 ways to do macro, and I'll talk about a few more that I have not tried, but maybe you have. First, I'm going to use my Canon PowerShot G7. And right now you're probably saying, what? A point and shoot? I don't know. But you know what? This is an all-around great camera. And one thing that gives it a reputation is its macro mode. That's right, people. This little baby is equipped for macro. I've set up a macro situation here with the G7 and Barbie. I have my G7 on a mini tripod and Barbie is sitting on her perch, which happens right now to be a part of the box she came in. I have the LCD screen on so you can see the image we're about to capture on the LCD screen. To set the camera to macro mode, you press this button on the back of the camera. It has a picture of a flower on it. And you switch back to normal mode here too, by the way. Next, I want to manually focus so I can get the focus exactly right. You can't use manual focus if you're in auto mode at the top of the camera, so make sure you're in one of the other modes. I happen to be in aperture priority. Now, to turn manual focus on, you press the button that says MF. Then you use the dial around the button to adjust the focus, like so. Now, this is a really important step because when you are working close up like this, you will have a very limited depth of field. So good focus is paramount. So let's take a photo. I can zoom in using the zoom at the top of the camera, but you can also crop the image a bit to make it appear as though you were even closer. Since this camera has a 10 megapixel sensor, you'll still get acceptable resolution for decent prints. Another option I want to show you is on the D3100 with the 18-55. The 18-55 is a kit lens that came with the D3100, and it just so happens to be a macro lens, or micro as Nikon calls it. The 18-55 and its newer VR variant, which is what I have here, is in many camera bags across the world. If you have this lens, you have a macro lens in your camera bag. Yes, there are more expensive macro lenses that will get you closer, like the Nikon 105mm, which is very popular for macro photography. But the 18-55 is a great lightweight lens that can easily get you started with macro photography. So to shoot something at the macro range, you use one of the scene modes on the D3100. Close-up mode, when combined with a macro lens, is great for macro shots. It's the flower on the mode dial. I'm going to use live view so you can see how I'm setting up the shot. As with the G7, I'm going to set the lens to manual focus to fine-tune the focus. To do that, all I need to do is use the switch on the lens to switch from auto to manual. The camera's smart enough to switch over to. Now I can focus on exactly what I want. Now to take a photo. One other thing you can do is set the self timer. It's helpful when you're worried about the camera shaking from you pressing the button. Just like I talked about with the G7 too, you can also crop the image because this is a good high resolution DSLR. Even though you're not getting as close with the 18-55 as you might with some more expensive macro lenses, a good crop on a crisp image will give you results comparable to those if you used a more expensive lens. There are other options to create macro images on the cheap. With non-macro lenses, you can get a special mount that will reverse the lens. You could also use tube extensions, which will position your lens further from the camera body and therefore project a larger image onto the sensor. Or finally, you could also use screw-on macro adapters, which will add macro capability to your existing non-macro lenses. Now for these last three options, some people say you might be sacrificing image quality. I say though, if you try one of these options and you're happy with the results, go for it. Don't be concerned with what anyone else says. And as a final note, even though you're working in a small space, all of the same rules apply as normal non-macro photography. You want good color by setting the appropriate white balance, you want good focus, and you want good lighting. Good lighting is especially important in macro photography, where the emphasis is really seeing the details in the image. This isn't like a moody, dark portrait. You want to see everything that is in the frame. Now, I'm curious to see what you all have done with macro, and what sorts of equipment did you use? Comment here on YouTube or head over to my Facebook page and post a photo. Just search for Snapchick if you haven't found me on Facebook. And definitely let me know if you have any questions.